Handbook of Personality. This is from my doctoral program in clinical psychology. Handbook of Personality, the next book review, we're going through my college textbooks that indoctrinate us to think like a leftist, a Marxist, a Freemason, a communist, and basically everything antithetical to the Catholic faith. This is how people are brainwashed. So remember now, this is again, there's a lot of good information in this book too, but there's a lot of anti-Catholic information, maybe not explicitly, but it's all there. We're going to show you exactly what we're talking about. So now this is something that psychologists would have learned, which is dangerous because these are the people who are supposed to be leading the people to think better. So on page 4, they talk about psychiatry and psychopathology. And it says, before the 1920s, the term personality was used in the United States first in religious and ethical writings, and somewhat later in discussions of abnormal psychology. So, right off the bat, they're teeing you up to study about personality that really, everything before the 1920s, that was more religious writing, ethical writing. So we're going to sweep that aside, 1920. And then what do they do for the next couple sections? Sociology beginning in the 1920s, American psychology in the 1920s, scientific ethos in the 1920s, 2 tasks of personality psychology beginning in showing the 1920s. You see what's going on here. A diligent sweeping aside of the classics, the robust tradition of the Catholic Church, Aristotle, it's all swept right to the side. It begins in 1920. So again, that's not an accurate portrayal of how thinking has come to be, how the conception of the world. Remember, when you look at Aristotle, this is the prevailing theory of psychology from 300 BC right up until about 1920. So it's important to see they always do that. Okay, now it's actually going to be brought up a little bit going back to the ancient Greeks. So page 17, biological basis of personality. It says, from the time of Galen's famous theory of the humors, people have speculated about the links between personality or mind and biology of the body. That's good, because this is where Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas held Galen's theory on the humors of the body, the 4 temperaments, the sanguine, the choleric, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic. They espouse these beliefs. There's saints that have written extensively on the different temperaments and how to help bring them to a level of spiritual perfection. Of course, you don't have you don't get perfection without the help of God. But as far as the at a natural level improving, but basically, so it mentions Galen in one sentence, and then in the very next sentence it says, for example, Freud anchored his theory in biology. And then it goes on to talk more and more about Freud and evolutionary psychology. So Galen was mentioned, which was good, because now we're talking Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, and immediately in the next sentence, it goes right to Freud. So just so you know what's going on here, Galen, goes back to BC, and the humors of the body. This is very, very early on, 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years. And now we're talking about Freud. So a massive gap. The prevailing theory of personality and temperament, and now that's all swept to the side and it goes straight to Freud. A diligent avoidance of the classics. And then what do we have on page 18? Charles Darwin. Whole big thing right here. And this is how this chapter winds up ending with Charles Darwin. And you know how the chapter ends? That's basically the view, the lens from which they want you to view this topic. So it says Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 and the First World War. Some social theorists reworked his ideas into social Darwinism. So now we're taking Darwinism, which is against the Catholic faith, from a biological level, and now we're going to go on to at the macro level, and then we're going to go on. We're going to say, well, let's transfer this over to the understanding of people, because since they don't want to talk about God, they don't want to talk about the Catholic faith. So let's do this idea that Charles Darwin had with biology, which is wrong and antithetical to the church, and let's apply it now to the study of people. Social Darwinism. And it says, many personality psychologists have used neo-Darwinian ideas to construct an evolutionary psychology of personality. Always evolution. You're always going to see evolution in these books. And that's basically another full page on that. and that's where it ends. So that's really where they want you to be. They want you to be looking at personality through the lens of evolution. And then sure enough, chapter 2, the entire chapter is evolution of human personality, human nature and individual differences. And it's a whole chapter, the evolutionary process, natural and sexual selection, products of evolutionary processes, evolutionary consequences for human nature. Humans have a human nature, the nature of evolved psychological mechanisms. You see, it's describing the human mind, important properties of evolved psychological mechanisms, the evolution of motives, goals, and strivings. Remember now, this is purely theoretical. This is all faith-based. And how education is we're not going to talk about the faith. We're not going to talk about religion. This theory is 100% faith-based in the sense that it's just a theory. There's no backing for this. This is just something they've come up with. And now they're pushing this all the way through. The evolution of individual differences. It's a whole chapter on this. All this nonsense. Balancing selection. So all that, a full chapter dedicated to social Darwinism and evolution. So we're not going to talk about the doctors of the church. We're not going to talk about the theologians. We're going to start with a theory that's coming out, that's being applied from biology, from Darwin. That's what the doctoral students are learning in psychology. So is it any wonder why a lot of these psychologists are going to be anti-religion, or they're not going to, or even if they're not anti-religion, they're not going to understand the person as well, because it's missing this everything. It's missing a whole bunch. Then what's chapter 3 after going through evolution? Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytical approaches to personality, the Oedipus complex, and the centrality of the sexual drive in the development of personality and neurosis. Remember, it's a full chapter. Freud, evolution of psychoanalytic theory, the obsession with evolution there. Freud's early models, Freud's developmental model, developments in psychoanalysis since Freud, Neo-Freudians. My point is this: it's a whole huge chapter dedicated to Freud and offshoots from him. So that's where they're taking you. That's the direction they take you in. Chapter 9, they start talking about temperaments. And they start off actually pretty well with ancient history. They talk about the temperaments. They talk about the sanguine, the melancholic, the choleric, the phlegmatic. They start with that. That's in the first paragraph. And then, first paragraph, 1, 2, 3. 3 paragraphs. And then after that, it's not mentioned anymore. It's taken out. So it starts with that, which seems to be good, but then again, nothing more on that. Remember, there's a whole chapter dedicated to evolutionary theory, which began in like 1830. Well, it was applied from 1830. The biological Darwin with evolution was the 1830s. But as far as the social Darwinianism, that's like the 1920s. So they're starting there. Huge gap, 2,000 years, relegated to 1 paragraph, or even 3 paragraphs. That's nothing. And then a whole other paragraph, a whole other chapter dedicated to Sigmund Freud and Neo-Freudianism. Chapter 12, the personality in animals. And it says the opportunities that animal research can bring to personality science. So remember, a diligent refusal to look up. In other words, diligent refusal to look up and ask, what does God say about humans? What does God say about personality? What does the church teach us? Instead of looking up, we're going to look down. We're going to look at the animals and we're going to say, what can these animals teach us about ourselves? And why not? If they're pushing the evolutionary theory, we're just higher on the evolutionary scale than animals. No, humans are different not only in degree to animals, but we're different in kind than animals. But to just say, sure, humans are animals, but we're different in kind. We're not just different in degree. We're not just a step up on the evolutionary ladder. Because again, evolution is against the Catholic faith. History, it says, over the past 3 decades, personality research in non-human animals has become increasingly common in scientific literature, with particularly fast growth in the last 5 years. So this is where they're at right now. They're telling you that basically we're not going to look up and say, what does God, what does the church teach us? they're going to look down. They're going to say, what can animals teach us about ourselves? Dangerous stuff. Not to say we can't gain anything from there, but you have to think about all this in context. In the context of everything that was just said, it's very dangerous. Now, when you're on chapter 25, personality and capacity for religious and spiritual experience. Now, the way they tee this up with religion, they say basically people who claim to be religious or people who claim to be spiritual, groups them all together. So there's no distinction between any of these different faiths, right? The Catholicism, which is ontologically, objectively true, and all other faiths. So it's putting all people who claim to be religious into one category. And I'm not saying that's a completely invalid thing to do all the time, but in the context of everything that was already said in this book, basically what we're getting is this is religious people tend to have these benefits, tend to have these personality benefits. Religion and spirituality tend to give people some psychological benefits. Sure. Yes, that is true. But that being said, to put all religions on equal footing, it's dangerous because it makes people think, well, I'm getting benefits from the religion, but so are other people. It's dangerous. You could never put the true faith on the same playing field as false faiths. Again, I'm not saying we're never putting them on the same field. I can understand sometimes you could group them together to say something about humanity, but done in this context, and clearly there's no effort at all to be presenting things from a Thomistic and scholastic point of view or the teachings of the church. So when you take the way they're presenting this with the rest of the book, what you're basically seeing is all religions are basically equal. Here's the benefits that just having religion give a person. And again, that's dangerous overall because you're putting the true faith in the same playing field as all other faiths. So that's personality psychology. More indoctrination for now the therapists out there we need therapists, we need counselors, we need clinicians. This is very important because mental health seems to be getting worse and worse this day and age. But where are the psychologists learning their information from? What kind of education did they get? And we see that would be their psychology. That could be their psychological handbook for personality. It is for a lot of therapists out there. So we need to get back to the Catholic foundation. The only way that's going to happen, even at a practical level, is fulfilling Our Lady of Fatima's 5 commands. Roman Catholic SOS, that's the mnemonic. R, rosary, every day. C, consecration, consecrate yourself to Mary. S, scapular, wear the brown scapular. O, offer up your sufferings. S, Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion, which is coming up this week. When enough Catholics fulfill Our Lady's 5 commands, then we will have the triumph of her Immaculate Heart, which will bring a period of peace. Russia will be converted, and the world will be happy, at least for a period of time. So that's how all these textbooks are going to change. We need Our Lady. God bless you. God bless your families. And we'll be up with another episode shortly. Take care.